On the first week of January 2026, the world #1 Aryna Sabalenka walked into a routine press conference and calmly admitted something that should terrify the WTA. She said, on camera, that this season she will deliberately skip mandatory tournaments, knowingly break the rules of her own tour, and accept fines and ranking penalties rather than keep risking her body on what she called an insane schedule. In a sport that sells itself on discipline, professionalism, and respect for the rules, the top player in the world just told you she is choosing her health over the rulebook because the rulebook has become a weapon against her. And the most revealing part is not Sabalenka's decision, it is the system that backed her into a corner where the choices die on court or pay the price for saying no. You can see the receipts everywhere. In Brisbane, after her opening win, Aryna Sabalenka stood in front of microphones and called the 2026 season crazy, said many players are getting injured, and admitted that last year she kept playing tournaments while sick or completely exhausted just to satisfy a rule that has nothing to do with sport and everything to do with content and revenue. She literally said they are going to fine me by the end of the season, and she is still going to skip events to protect her body. This is not a rumor. This is the world #1 predicting her own punishment in January because she knows exactly how the WTA's mandatory system works. And she is not alone. Her main rival, Iga Swiatek, has also warned that it's impossible for top players to meet every mandatory requirement without breaking down, even as both women were already punished in 2025 for trying to manage their schedules. So why does this matter? Because under current WTA regulations, if you are one of the sport's biggest stars, the tour does not really ask you to play a full season, it orders you. The rules say top players are obliged to compete in all 4 Grand Slams, 10 WTA 1000 tournaments, and 6 WTA 500 events each year. That is an 11-month calendar that leaves almost no room for genuine rest, injury recovery, or the kind of smart scheduling that used to define careers at the very top. Miss too many of those events, and the punishment is brutal. Fines, the dreaded 0 points entries, and the loss of ranking points you already earned somewhere else. When fans look at the ranking board on Monday, they see a number. What they do not see is the invisible tax the WTA is already deducting from players who dared to sit out a week to keep their bodies from breaking. Let's rewind to the end of 2025, because that's where this story really exploded. In October, the WTA quietly stripped a group of top women, including Aryna Sabalenka and Iga Swiatek, of ranking points because they failed to play the minimum number of WTA 500 tournaments. The rule is simple on paper. Every season, top players need at least 6 500-level events on their record. In 2025, Sabalenka only played 3 of them, in Brisbane, Stuttgart, and Berlin. Swiatek fell short as well. When the rankings updated, the punishment was obvious. Sabalenka lost points from her previous results, Swiatek had even more points wiped out, and other stars like Coco Gauff, Madison Keys, and Amanda Anisimova were hit too. This was not a gentle warning. It was an automatic reset that treated missing a tournament like a crime against the system. Look at the numbers. In one wave of penalties, Sabalenka had 10 points removed from her tally, while Swiatek lost 65, purely because they hadn't filled the WTA 500 quota. A week later, another sanction arrived. Sabalenka was docked 120 points from her Dubai performance, while Swiatek lost the 108 points she had earned in Stuttgart. These were not points they cheated to gain. These were points they had already won on court, stripped away afterwards because of a scheduling formula designed in an office. For Swiatek, this is not even a one-off incident. She had already lost ranking points under the same rule in a prior season, a punishment that contributed to her losing the #1 ranking in the first place. When the WTA says athlete welfare is a priority, this is the fine print. You can protect your body now, and we will quietly erase your results later. To understand why Sabalenka now says she would rather pay fines than keep obeying this system, you need to understand what last season looked like inside her camp. By her own description, she spent stretches of 2025 playing while unwell or badly fatigued, pushing through illnesses and exhaustion just to show up at mandatory events because skipping a WTA 1000 or a WTA 500 could trigger financial penalties and ranking hits. In early 2026, she admitted that despite having one of the most consistent years of her career, she often arrived at tournaments already drained from overplaying. That's the definition of structural pressure. The tour designs a calendar that forces its biggest stars to be everywhere, then blames them when their bodies can't keep up. When Sabalenka calls the rules insane, she's not being dramatic. She's describing the experience of grinding through an 11-month calendar that punishes self-preservation. Now layer in Iga Swiatek. In late 2025, she said what every fan could see. With 4 majors, 10 WTA 1000s, 6 WTA 500s, and various obligations, it's practically impossible for a top player to play everything and maintain any real balance. She talked openly about how hard it is to squeeze the mandatory list into a single season, even for someone young, fit, and obsessed with preparation. Despite that, she still tried to follow the rules, only to watch the WTA dock her points anyway, when the math didn't add up. This is the part the organization doesn't like to talk about. The mandatory system is calibrated for an ideal player, with no injuries, no personal life, and no need to listen to their own body. The moment reality appears, the punishment kicks in. At the same time, the WTA has been sending out a very different message in public. When criticism of the 11-month season grew loud during the so-called Asian swing, as injuries piled up and withdrawals mounted, the tour insisted that athlete welfare is a top priority. Spokespeople pointed to ongoing conversations with players, to efforts to improve the structure of the circuit, to promises of better coordination and higher compensation. It's a polished narrative built for press releases and social media, but it runs straight into the wall of what Sabalenka and Swiatek are actually living. You can't say athlete welfare is your priority while designing a rulebook that punishes players for acting in their own medical interest. At least, you can't say it with a straight face to the people inside the locker room. The real conflict is simple. For the WTA, the presence of its biggest stars at every big event is a commercial asset. For the players, their bodies are not. So, the tour builds a mandatory calendar that maximizes star attendance, attaches ranking and financial penalties to any deviation, then points to the fine print when players break down. The 0-point system is the purest expression of that logic. If you skip a required event or fail to meet the quota, your ranking entry for that slot becomes a 0, and in some cases, the tour deletes the points you earned somewhere else. From a distance, it looks like any other line in the rulebook. Up close, it's a mechanism that forces players to choose between long-term career health and short-term compliance. So in that light, Sabalenka's new stance is not a rebellion, it's self-defense. She's telling the WTA that she will treat fines and ranking penalties as the cost of staying healthy enough to compete at all. Imagine hearing that from the person you market as the face of your sport. The world #1 has concluded that following your rules is more dangerous to her future than breaking them. She has watched the tour erase her points, watched her rivals get hit with the same sanctions, and still decided that she will skip events again rather than be dragged through another year of playing while sick and exhausted. When a system forces its top worker to treat punishment as a wellness plan, the problem is not the worker, the problem is the system. The WTA's counter-argument is always the same. The schedule is long, but players have input. The rules are clear, and the mandatory system creates fairness. Everybody knows what they're signing up for. But that logic collapses the moment you ask one question. What happens when the human body doesn't match the spreadsheet? For Sabalenka, the answer in 2025 was simple: lose ranking points. For Swiatek, it was lose points and the #1 ranking. For others in the same situation, from Goff to Keys to Anisimova, it was quietly accept the penalties or risk being labeled difficult. None of that looks like athlete welfare. It looks like a governance model that treats players as endlessly renewable resources, until those players finally say no. There's a longer shadow here too. When the world #1 signals that she will not obey mandatory attendance at all costs, it gives cover to the rest of the locker room. If Sabalenka is willing to be fined to protect her health, then why should a lower-ranked player with less prize money in the bank and less media protection be forced to play through injury just to avoid the zero-point trap? The WTA now faces a choice it has tried to postpone for years. It can keep tightening the screws on its own stars, or it can admit that the schedule it built for television rights and sponsor obligations has crossed the line into active risk. So far, every public statement leans towards the first option: quiet adjustments, vague promises, no real structural change. Meanwhile, the physical reality of the tour has not changed. The season still runs for 11 months. The off-season is a handful of weeks. The travel, the surface changes, the time zones, the constant pressure to defend points from the year before all pile up. By the time the Asian swing arrives, bodies are breaking down everywhere. The difference now is that the two women who have defined the top of the rankings, Sabalenka and Swiatek, are saying it out loud. They are not asking for a lighter workload as a luxury. They are describing a system that has already punished them for trying to stay healthy, and warning that the next step will be even more brutal injuries if nothing changes. So when Aryna Sabalenka says she will skip events this year, even though they are going to fine her, believe her. She has already tested the alternative. She played sick, she played exhausted, she paid with ranking points anyway. Now she's prepared to pay with money rather than her body. What that exposes is not just a scheduling disagreement, it is a punishment system that forces the very best players in the world to choose between their careers on paper and their careers in reality. The WTA can keep insisting that athlete welfare is a priority, or it can finally admit what its own #1 has already told the world. Under the current rules, if you want to survive, you break them.